This is Igor Urtushov, a man who inflicted pain and terror beyond measure, a man whose crimes are so vile that there have been attempts to remove all record of him from the internet. Crimes so horrific that officers who worked on the case had psychological issues for years after. Preying on the most vulnerable, he's shown a level of brutality few have witnessed before. This is a story of pure, unrelenting horror. The case of Igor Urtushov is one that has always stuck with me. He committed crimes that go beyond that of any fiction. He's just so brutal. But before we dive in, if you find this video fascinating, then please drop it a like and leave me a comment below. And if you're new here, then please hit the subscribe button and consider following me on Instagram. It all really helps. Thank you. This video is created solely for educational and documentary purposes. It does not endorse or condone the criminal actions described within. Urtushov's reign of terror began to unravel on September 29, 1994, in St. Petersburg, Russia. That afternoon, a 9-year-old Yusan Konstantin Kuzmin was on his way into his apartment building. He rang the buzzer and his mother opened the door from upstairs. As Yusan stepped inside, a thin young man, Urtushov, slipped through the door behind him. Yusan assumed it was just another resident. They got into the elevator together. They both stood there, staring at the doors as they closed behind them. But as soon as the doors closed, Urtushov attacked the boy. He began to strangle him, and Yusan lost consciousness. Then, Urtushov hauled his limp body into a utility room on the 15th floor. Meanwhile, Yusan's mother became concerned. Her son hadn't come home. She went downstairs to find him, but he was nowhere to be seen. In a panic, she began knocking on neighbors' doors, asking if anyone had seen her son, but they hadn't. Urtushov had forced himself onto the unconscious Yusan, but this was only the beginning of the ordeal. Urtushov then put his fingers in his rectum and used a hook to slice open his crotch. Then he began to pull out 8.5 meters of his intestines. He ripped them out, stared at them, and took a bite of the innards and threw them into a bin that was in the room. Convinced that he had killed his victim, Urtushov fled the scene, but somehow Yusan clung to life. Miraculously, he had survived the initial attack and had managed to crawl his way back to his home. His mother, returning from her search, found him collapsed outside their front door, pale and unconscious, but still alive. When officers and paramedics arrived, they were horrified by the gruesome scene. But he was still alive, and importantly, he could identify his attacker. For the authorities, this was the break they needed. There had been many brutal attacks happening across St. Petersburg over the last few months, and this, the authorities felt, was the best chance they had of catching the perpetrator. This horrific crime was one of only many brutal attacks committed by Urtushov. But what could drive a man to such depravity? And why did he only prey on the most vulnerable? His upbringing gives us some insight into this. Like many other killers and abusers, Urtushov was once a victim himself. Born on August 16, 1971, in the Krasnoyarsk region in southern Russia, he was raised by neglectful and abusive parents who drank heavily. His mother even continued to drink throughout her pregnancy. From a young age, Urtushov was deprived of basic care. He was underfed and received no affection. He was often too weak and malnourished to keep up with the other children. He would be bullied by the other kids, but when he told his parents, they simply did not care. He rarely attended school and was largely left to fend for himself. When Urtushov was 7, his father abandoned the family, and Urtushov never seen him again. On top of this, 3 years later, Ertushov was badly injured by a car. Unfortunately, he received brain damage. Although only slight, it was still enough to leave him with intellectual struggles later in life. Overwhelmed by her son's disabilities, his mother sent him away to a boarding school for children with special needs. And at this point, she washed her hands of him and never made contact again. Ertushov was now fully abandoned. Though this could have been a chance at a fresh start, boarding school became a personal hell for him. Older students bullied and beat him, targeting his slight build and effeminate voice. In time, the abuse escalated to repeated intimate assaults by groups of older males. This happened often. It's difficult to imagine the deep, profound damage this would have done to his psyche, along with the abandonment and isolation. Yet it was in these dark and desperate times the seeds of Ertushov's own brutality began to show. After leaving boarding school, Ertushov tried to find a normal life. He trained as a carpenter, but steady work never materialized, forcing him to scrape by with odd jobs, including being a milkman, cleaner, and a cook, just to make ends meet. Desperate to find something more, he saved what little money he could and headed to Moscow, hoping to find a brighter future. Instead, he only struggled more. Work was scarce, and he often ended up sleeping on the streets or in rundown hostels, sometimes going hungry for days at a time. By 1993, and seemingly disillusioned with life in Moscow, Ertushov moved to Metalastroy, a small village on the outskirts of St. Petersburg. There, in the city, he found a job as a dishwasher at a gay bar called Pegasus Cafe. Quickly, he was promoted to waiter, and his sense of style grew bolder. He began bleaching his hair blonde and wearing fashionable clothes. His co-workers took a strong dislike to him, seeing him as vain and self-centered, a troublemaker who spread rumors to stir up drama. Yet, wealthy customers at the bar found him strangely captivating, and he soon discovered a more lucrative way to earn cash. He became a male escort. He found regular clients by working at the bar, and it was not only his looks that made him popular, but also his aggressive, almost sadistic approach to intimacy. Still, he insisted he wasn't gay. Men were just an income source. He would sleep with women for pleasure, even though most found him unattractive. Over time, his appetite for sadistic thrills grew harder to satisfy with consensual encounters. He craved something darker, a need for real victims that would drive him to cross the line into brutal murder. Ertushov's crime spree began in December 1993. He had decided exactly what he was going to do and who he would target. His plan was simple and sinister: to lurk in Sonovsky Park, waiting for young males he could easily overpower. They would be defenseless, vulnerable, and completely unaware of the predator lurking in the shadows. He waited patiently, hidden amongst the trees, until he spotted 3 boys, each around 11 years old, walking through the park. They had just finished a training session and felt safe together, with no idea that they were being followed. When Ertushov was confident that no one else was around, he made his move. He approached the boys, pulled out a knife, and threatened to kill them if he didn't do as he said. Terrified, one of the boys instantly ran away, leaving behind the 2 others, who were both brothers. Ertushov then pulled out a syringe containing a foul-smelling, oddly coloured substance and forced the brothers to open their mouths, squirting the liquid inside. Whether he intended to knock them out or simply terrorise them remains unclear, but whatever was in the syringe had no effect on them. Still wielding his knife, he dragged the brothers behind some trees and forced himself on them one after the other. When he was finished, he fled the scene, leaving the traumatized brothers alive but forever scarred. Later, they described their attacker as a slim, roughly 25-year-old man with bleached blonde hair. Though police began a search, nothing came of it at the time. After his appalling crime, Ertushov returned to his job waiting tables at the Pegasus Cafe, resuming his life as though nothing had happened. Yet inside him, that predatory urge was ready to surface again. In February 1994, Ertushov had a rare day off from the cafe and spent it drinking heavily. With a drunken impulse, he decided to go for a walk. Along the way, he spotted another boy walking home from school, his Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles backpack slung casually over one shoulder. Ertushov followed him, watching his every move. Then the boy entered his apartment building, and Ertushov slipped in silently behind him. As soon as the door closed, Ertushov pounced, clamping a hand over the boy's mouth and pinching his nose shut. He suffocated him until he passed out. Then he dragged him into the utility room and forced himself on him. Throughout the attack, Ertushov gripped the boy's neck and ended up strangling him to death. Drunk and overwhelmed by a despicable desire to offend, he would later admit that he had gone too far and that he never meant to murder him. He blamed it on the drink. Before fleeing the scene, Ertushov took the boy's backpack as a trophy, a sign that he got some sort of perverse pleasure from the murder. When the youth's body was eventually found, the residents of the building were horrified that such a brutal killing could occur right where they lived. Investigators suspected that this was the same perpetrator who had attacked the two brothers in Sanovsky Park, but they still lacked any concrete evidence to make an arrest. Now aware that they were dealing with a murderer, the police braced themselves for what they felt was inevitable. As long as Ertushov walked free, it would only be a matter of time before he struck again. And strike again he did. In May 1994, Ertushov set his sights on a 10-year-old boy, stepping into an apartment building located on Ruiz Avenue. Silently, he followed him inside. Once there, Ertushov told him a story about a pigeon's nest hidden in the attic, and then asked the boy if he wanted to go and see it. Intrigued, the boy agreed, and together they went into the dim, cramped loft. There, Ertushov strangled him until he was unconscious, and then forced himself on the boy. But not only this, afterwards, he put his finger into the youth's rectum and tore it open. He ripped it apart. Afterwards, the boy was able to climb back down to the apartment block and he screamed hysterically. Neighbours were horrified and phoned an ambulance. The boy would not only be traumatized, but permanently disabled, though he did survive. The boy's description to the police confirmed their worst fears. It matched the perpetrator from the previous two cases. With that information, the investigation suddenly went into the public eye, and authorities released a warning about a man fitting Ertushov's description. Yet, despite the heightened awareness, still no solid leads emerged. The people of St. Petersburg, however, were on high alert. Parents began to escort their children everywhere, wary eyes scanning each face for a sign of the predator. No one knew who might be next, and the city of St. Petersburg was now on edge. The next assault took place in June 1994, near the Neva River, and this time it involved two young males, aged 11 and 9. Ertushov had quietly followed them, watching until he was certain they were alone. Then he made his move. He approached them with a seemingly innocent request, saying he had dropped his keys into the water and could they help him fish them out. Although the boys were aware of a maniac on the loose, they saw only a well-dressed, respectable man before them. Surely this couldn't be the predator everyone feared. They agreed to help. But as they walked closer to the water's edge, Ertushov lunged. He grabbed one boy, threatening to throw him in the water if he didn't do as he said. Terrified and cornered, neither boy could fight back. At knife point, he forced himself on them one by one before fleeing the scene. leaving them traumatized and alone by the riverbank. Despite another set of matching descriptions from the terrified boys, the police still had no solid leads. No witnesses came forward, and Ertushov remained at large. Yet his overconfidence would soon lead to his downfall. On September 29th, 1994, with parents across St. Petersburg keeping a closer eye on their children, Ertushov decided to target a different kind of victim. This time it was a teenager, roughly 16 years old. He followed the teen into his apartment building and slipped in behind him unnoticed. They got into the elevator together, and as soon as the doors slid shut, just as he'd done before, Ertushov struck without warning, lunging for the teen's throat. But this time, the victim fought back, and with Ertushov's slight build, the struggle was unexpectedly even. When the elevator reached its floor, the doors opened and Ertushov ran away, fleeing down the hallway with bruises, but still determined to find a victim. He walked literally just around the block, his predatory gaze darting over every passerby. It was then that he stumbled on Yusan Konstantin Kuzmin, the boy mentioned at the beginning of this story. He launched into yet another violent attack after literally just leaving another crime scene. The same things happened. He followed him into the elevator, strangled him, then took him to a utility room, and then forced himself on him. And then, in one of the most horrific acts I've heard of, he ripped out 8.5 meters of Yusan's intestines. Ertushov would later say, and quote, "I wanted to eat the intestines, but I couldn't, so I just chewed on it." Vile. After Yusan crawled back into his apartment, where his mother found him unconscious, he was rushed to the hospital, where they managed to stabilize him, but he was still missing a large part of his intestines, and unfortunately, the doctors in Russia at the time were not able to help him, but a group of specialist doctors in America could, and although the doctors offered to work for free, the operations themselves were expensive. By this point, the case had received national attention, and money was raised by the people of Russia, a total of $500,000 in just 10 days, which was enough to fly out Yusan, his mother and grandmother, out to the United States so he could begin treatment. For 6 long years, Yusan fought to try and survive. After over 30 operations and transplants to fit artificial intestines inside him, his body finally gave up and he passed away in the year 2000. But it is a testament to the people of Russia and America who tried to save this boy's life. It's so tragic. Just after the double attack, with the national attention it received, the heat turned up on Ertushov. Both the 16-year-old teenager and Yusan provided detailed descriptions, which were quickly broadcast on TV and printed in national newspapers. Added to this, police also found a bloodied fingerprint at Yusan's crime scene. This was highly suspected to be the killers. With everyone now on high alert, the manhunt was underway, but Ertushov's arrogance got the better of him. One evening, while in a gay bar, Ertushov and the fellow people there seen the news come on the TV. The composite sketch came on the screen, and almost mocking the resemblance the sketch had to him, Ertushov said, and quote, "Look, I'm on the TV." His comment sent a chill through the other people, and one of them reported the incident to the authorities. By then, the police were already narrowing their focus on gay bars, suspecting the killer had a strong chance of being a gay man who would visit these bars due to all the victims being male. Officers went to his workplace, the Pegasus Cafe, to bring him in for questioning, only to find that he had already fled St. Petersburg. Feeling the net tighten around him, Ertushov had travelled to the city of Murmansk. He was staying with a friend while he waited for the heat surrounding the case to die down. After a month, his friend had had enough of Ertushov and asked him to leave. By this point, Ertushov felt confident enough to go back to St. Petersburg, although he was a little apprehensive. Once he arrived back in the city, he realised that there was not a mob chasing him, and he began to feel confident again. He took his belongings and began to see his old clients as a way of making money and having a place to stay, as by now he had lost his apartment and his job. However, whilst at one of these places, one of his clients noticed amongst Ertushov's belongings was a bloodied Mutant Hero Turtles backpack that was clearly a child's. Alarmed and recognising that Ertushov may be this killer on the loose, this person told the authorities. On November 28, 1994, Ertushov was finally apprehended. Officers found the backpack and other items of clothing that belonged to his victims. Even the fingerprint found at Yusin's crime scene matched that of Ertushov's. The officers knew that they now had their man. As a final nail to confirm his identity, one of the boys attacked at the riverside was asked to pick out the man who had attacked him in a lineup. When the boy seen Ertushov again, he freaked out and began to scream. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Ertushov initially denied everything, insisting he was too loving to commit such atrocities. But when it became clear that he couldn't talk his way out, he switched tactics, claiming insanity during interrogations and behaving erratically to prove it. Eventually, he confessed to his crimes, yet it took 2 years to bring him to trial. His reputation was so vile that no lawyer wanted to represent him, creating a legal limbo. In May 1996, his trial began. It had to be held behind closed doors, away from the public, as they had plans to kidnap him and serve justice their own way. The people of St. Petersburg wanted blood. In court, Ertushov sobbed, begging the judge to declare him insane and send him to a psychiatric institution. But medical experts concluded that, though he did suffer from mental health issues, he still knew right from wrong. After all he had done, Ertushov now wanted pity. The judge handed down the death sentence, only for it to be commuted to life imprisonment when Russia abolished the death penalty shortly after his conviction. He was sent to a strict regime colony to spend out the rest of his days. But Ertushov's torment did not end there. Apparently, he cried for days on end and would still try to play the insanity card. Every inmate wanted to kill him, and he had to live with this. After more than 2 decades of this tortured existence, Ertushov died of heart failure in 2021. Ertushov's crimes were so vile that certain people in Russia tried to have all records of him removed from the internet. Even to this day, he's not widely spoken about, but I wanted to bring this case to you, as it's so shocking. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay sane.